We are absolutely delighted to be joined by an amazing singer-songwriter. She's a socialist, a feminist, and a lesbian to boot, and was described by The Guardian in 2011 as being a powerful voice for songwriting. Since then, she's gone from strength to strength, and she delights crowds up and down the country and beyond. And we're delighted that she's made time for us tonight. So, Grace Petrie, it is lovely to welcome you to Not Alone with Pride in Surrey. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. No, it's lovely to be here. Nice to make contact in these strange virtual times.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. Right, okay, so you, well, for anybody who's seen you live, they'll know that you've got a really unique style. Can you tell us a little bit about where that style has come from and who you've been influenced by?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, I was kind of, I get my musical influences from my dad, I guess. My dad loves music, and he kind of brought me up on like the Beatles and Fleetwood Mac and the classic sort of thing. And then I suppose when I was in my late teens, I got a little bit more into what I suppose would be called protest music. You know, Billy Bragg, Tracy Chapman, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, more sort of thing. And then obviously sort of when in 2010, about when I was about 23, 10 years ago now, the Conservatives got into power, and then that really changed the direction of my songwriting quite a lot. I wasn't really a political artist at all before that. But you know, the Tories have a way of inspiring protest songs. So I kind of ended up writing quite a lot about austerity and about the kind of, you know, sort of what I perceived to be the kind of punishing the most vulnerable people in society for, you know, the mistakes of capitalism that had been going on all across my lifetime, but certainly, you know, became much more pronounced in 2010 when this austerity regime was brought in. And so that kind of influenced me to go in a much more sort of explicitly political direction. And then from there, I mean, I've been very, very lucky, and I've had a very sort of interesting career, and a part of that is that I've been quite lucky to get a lot of work with stand-up comedians. So I've done quite a lot of support work actually for comics as well as musicians, and that I think is where I suppose some of the, you know, what you generously describe as a unique style comes from, because I've kind of developed this habit of talking a lot on stage, which was just something that I kind of picked up off, you know, my friends Josie Long and Robin Ince and Deborah Francis White and a lot of the other comics that I've been lucky enough to work with and kind of pick up, you know, that sort of, I think comics have quite a different way of talking to an audience than singers do, and in my experience anyway, I think that's been quite useful when you're trying to make a political point. I think sort of having a bit of humor in the room as well, I think it just puts audiences at ease, because, you know, people don't go out for a night out to be shouted at. Do you know what I mean? So I think, and some of the topics that I'm singing about are quite heavy. So I've always found that, you know, I mean, I've never called what I do comedy, but I think there are sort of comic elements of it that I think just sort of, you know, open the room up a little bit more. So it's a lot of different influences, really. Yeah, I mean, I think I guess I call myself folk music. The more I learn about folk music, the more I realise that I'm not really a folk singer, but I'm still clinging on to the label quite possessively. But yeah, I mean, musically, I love all kinds of music. But yeah, I'd say that, you know, Billy Bragg, Tracy Chapman, Joni Mitchell are all pretty big influences on my songwriting. I apologise for my barking dog. Sorry.
You're all right. You're all right. And you are really funny on stage. I think we've seen you, and yeah, we belly laughed and cried in equal measure nearly, because it was just so funny, and you know, your appeal, I think, is just so broad reaching as a result. You did a stint with Guilty Feminist Crew, didn't you?
That's right. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I mean, I started working with the Guilty Feminist. Oh gosh, I think it's coming on for sort of 3 years ago now. And, you know, just they've been absolutely amazing. I mean, the audience of the Guilty Feminists are just this sort of incredibly supportive army. You know, as soon as I was on the podcast for the first time, you know, they all followed me on social media, and they all come to my gigs, And yeah, I mean, the Guilty Feminist is the place that I've been introduced to. Obviously, Deb, the host, but also, you know, Jess Foster Q, Sophie Duker, Sarah Pascoe, Bridget Christie. You know, just incredible names of comedy to sort of work alongside, and you know, hopefully try and pick up some notes. I'm kind of there watching them while they're on stage, trying to rip things off for my act.
As Lisa said, we have been lucky enough to see you live, and you have like this most dedicated, incredible, loyal audience that know every word to every song, and they sing along with you, and they follow you around the country. How do you feel that you've achieved that? Do you think it is the comedy, or do you think it's your social media presence? You know, you've really got this dedication from your fans.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm blown away by them. You know, I always am, and I think it is a very. I mean, all bands, you know, say I couldn't do it without the fans, but I really think being an independent artist, you know, I don't have a record label, I don't have you know, any sort of management or anything. It's kind of it's quite a sort of you know, one man band kind of thing, one woman band. But I think that there's a lot of people who've been with me for a really long time, and they've kind of, you know, I'm very, very lucky that there's people who've kind of seen me come from, you know, I've got people who've been, you know, in the room when there was just me and 4 people. Do you know what I mean? So that's a very, very intimate experience. And then to kind of see those faces come back and back as the rooms, you know, gradually get bigger and bigger is an incredibly sort of, I think it engenders a real sort of intimacy. Actually, I feel like I have a really authentic intimacy with what I am very humbled to call my audience, and I think, you know, being sort of like being gay and talking about that a lot, and particularly I think being a butch lesbian, which is something that I quite proudly identify as, you know, I think that more and more, and since my last record Queer as Folk came out in 2018, I see a lot more sort of a lot of young queer people, but just a lot of queer people across the board. And, you know, I think that we still, in 2020, we don't actually have that much representation for sort of lesbian singers or butch lesbian singers, or, you know, just queer artists in general. You know, there's still not that many people who we see on screen or on stage who, I mean, I know that when I was young, I didn't see anybody anywhere on stage or screen who looked anything like me, or who was talking, you know, or making art about my experiences. And I think it's still, that hasn't improved very much in the intervening years, and that's why I think for a lot of these people that come to my shows, I think I might be sort of talking myself up here, but it feels like more than just, oh, you know, I like these songs. You know, it feels like a sort of I think that representation and that moment of sort of community that is very much both ways. You know, I feel the same way looking out at an audience of people who really understand me in ways that I was never really understood growing up, you know. So I think it's a very, 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 very special thing. And also, I can't deny that I think the fact that I'm singing about socialist messages and I'm singing about social justice, that does, to be perfectly blunt with you, that invites a certain type of person and it turns away a certain type of person.
Well, perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you know, I don't, whilst there is an argument, I guess, for not always just preaching to the converted, I think I have a much better time preaching to them than I would preaching to a load of Tories, I think. So I'm pretty happy with it the way it is. Yeah.
Awesome. That actually leads us on perfectly. I mean, we touched earlier on politics and how that's influenced your music. And one thing that I sort of recognise is that there's almost a reluctance for people to talk about politics. And we actually, in our household anyway, we believe that it's really important. You know, we have we've got 4 kids and we have some serious debates around this dinner table. And how important do you think it is that we speak to young people and people in general about our political beliefs and views?
I mean, I think it's so important, and you know, God, you know, we're just coming off the back. I know we touched on it slightly earlier, but we're just coming off the back of an American election, which I think, you know, an awful lot of people, myself included, breathed a massive, massive, massive sigh of relief at the outcome of that. Yeah, and I think that, you know, we live in a time of you know, I think the internet is an incredible thing, and I certainly wouldn't have a career without it. You know, I think career paths like mine of an independent artist being able to directly publish to an audience, that didn't exist before the internet, and in many ways I owe it everything. But I think, you know, we live in a time where it is so easy to become so polarized, because social media, as we know, you know, it's designed in such a way that you find your tribe and you get reinforced the messages of your tribe, and then you know, you get further and further away from the people who don't agree with you. And having said that, you know, I find it very, very difficult, to be honest with you, because I also think that there, you know, when it comes to, you know, homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, misogyny, you know, ableism, all manner of things, you know, I don't want to spend time with people who disagree with my fundamental human rights, you know what I mean? And I don't want to spend time talking to them. And that is a real, I think that's a dilemma that a lot of us find ourselves in, I think, increasingly these days, because I want the world to be a better place, but I want to enjoy my life. You know, I don't want to put myself in situations where I feel like, you know, my humanity, my dignity is being debated. I think things that absolutely should not be up for debate are being sort of chipped away at. But having said that, it's a tough one, because I don't know how things are going to get better if we don't talk to each other, and dialogue at the end of the day is the only way forward. And so I think talking is absolutely the most important thing, but I think there's room and there's necessity, I suppose, for like keeping those people in your corner who you can go back to and feel safe with. And you know, I think absolutely, let's, you know, always talk about politics, but I think you're, at any point, I would say that anybody has the right to say, well, I don't need to be here in this conversation, and I'm going to walk away because it makes me feel, you know, attacked, and it makes me feel unsafe. And I think, you know, you know, not to get too kind of in the reeds of American politics, but I think there's a lesson to be learned actually about what just happened in America. And I think the Democrats actually managed to forge a very broad coalition of people who were uniting against, you know, a shared enemy. And I think, you know, we could stand to learn a thing or two, certainly on the British left, I think, about that, about the idea that, like, you know, we might not all agree on absolutely everything, but, you know, the things that we do agree on are massive, you know. And I think we would get further in certainly the British left would get a lot further if we were able to maybe sort of learn a bit from, you know, like the kind of the Bernie Sanders supporters, when Bernie obviously did not become the candidate, you know, there was a real effort made from Joe Biden's team to make sure that those people weren't just kind of driven out of the movement. And I would really like to see, naming no names, the same thing happen over here.
Yeah, be incredible.
It was a very clever campaign, but my God, what a stressful week that was. As the count was happening, we were up half the night and up in the morning.
American news stations on 24/7. We didn't get anything else done except glued to it. I mean, moving on.
They operate at such a different pulse, don't they? CNN and stuff. It's not like watching the BBC. I felt like I was on drugs. Yeah,
it's bamboozling, isn't it? But I mean, that election, it was obviously the result we all wanted, but it was tight and it was close and it was frightening. And there seems to be worldwide a real rise in the far right, and people feeling a lot freer and more able to express right-wing opinions. What is your thought on this meteoric rise of what seems to be hate?
Well, I think, I mean, like I said, I don't just want to sort of blame the internet for everything, but I do think, you know, the way nothing has ever been launched that is as much of a Pandora's box as I think social media is, you know, and the power that it has to just engender and then, you know, facilitate and exaggerate conspiracies and fake news at an incredible rate, you know, and I don't think we've ever really seen anything like that before in terms of just unregulated fake news being allowed to kind of rip across the world. But also, you know, I do think, I mean, I know, I don't know if this is kind of stepping on the toes of one of the other questions you were going to ask, but, you know, personally, I talk a lot about transphobia and you know, the attack on trans people that has been very, very prevalent in, certainly in Britain and in British feminism and in the British left wing, for, you know, at least the past kind of 5 years. I mean, much longer than that, but it's been very prominent in the past 5 years. It's been very prevalent. And I think, you know, there's a lesson to be learned from that, which is that, this is what I always say on stage, is that, you know, the moment that you start to allow some of our rights to be debatable, it's a very short journey between that to, it's a very short journey between, well, actually, why are we letting trans people have this and this and this? It's very short to get from there to, well, why are we letting gay people have this and this and this? And why are we letting bisexual people have this and this and this? And then it's a very short journey from there to, well, why are we letting women have all of these? You know, at the end of the day, like, we are, you know, we aren't, it's a cliche, but we none of us are free until all of us are free. And I think, you know, we have always needed solidarity between our minority communities to achieve anything. You know, that obviously, like, if you look at the film Pride, you know, the kind of the way that the miners' strike was kind of supported by LGSM, and the way that in turn, you know, gay rights were then kind of helped by the mine workers unions, things like this. These kind of alliances, you know, you see them throughout history, because at the end of the day, we are only as strong as we are united. And I think it's very easy, I think, as I said, with fake news and with social media, I think it's very easy for people to kind of sit in their houses and kind of not go outside and not realize that they're a part of a society, they're a part of a community. You know, it's very easy to kind of sit there on your laptop and sit there on your phone and just kind of read all this stuff about how you're the, you know, you're the kind of target of everything. And you know, I think all this stuff, as you say, with like men's rights and, you know, white lives and straight pride, it's very easy to kind of sit there and just feel completely got at. And I think in many ways, you know, I had high hopes, ironically, at the start of the pandemic, that I think it might engender more of a sense of community again, because I think for the first time, you know, where I live, I've lived in this house for 2 years, and it was the first time that I saw, you know, the neighbours checking on each other. It was the first time I saw people kind of having these conversations about the fact that, like, well, you know, what is an essential job? You know, like we you know, when everything had to stop, when the entire world had to stop, you know, we still needed, like, our supermarket workers, we still needed our street cleaners, we still needed our, you know, our bin men, our postmen, postmen and women, and bin men and women, and you know, it wasn't bankers, was it, that was an essential service when it kind of comes down to it. You know, the nuts and bolts of how we need each other. I feel like the modern age is kind of taking us in some ways further away from that, and it's ironic because in lots of ways we're more connected than we've ever been. You know, the internet should be a tool for massive connectivity, but I think it's being used by some pretty nefarious interests to sort of stoke up this idea that it's just like every man for himself. And I think that is, to be honest, I think it's completely where Donald Trump's presidency came from. You know, and I really hope that, you know, him losing now heralds the beginning of like a bit of a turning of the tide, I think, you know. And I think the only way, as I said before, the only way that we're going to get back to that kind of, I mean, I'm not saying that everything has ever been kind of completely okay, but, you know, the only way we're going to get back to some sort of kind of sense of community and empathy is by dialogue and by talking, you know. And I think having a conversation with people face to face, you know, I get much further with people that I disagree with when I actually speak to them. You know, they come up to me at gigs and they say, you know, I don't agree with what you said about this, and then we have an actual conversation, and it doesn't sort of slip into insults the way that it does on the, you know, you try and talk to somebody on Twitter and so quickly, you know, they're having a go at you. So, and I'm the same, you know, I'm really trying to be better these days at not immediately getting defensive, you know, but I think when you see somebody in front of you and you see a human face and you see somebody, you know, like having thoughts and feelings about the things that you're saying, I think there's just much more of an opportunity to kind of recognize that this is somebody who's bringing their truth and their story and their journey and their, you know, insecurities and their, you know, bullshit, their baggage, their damage. They're bringing, you know, all of that to where they stand today to meet you here. And equally, they can see that you're bringing all of your best intentions and worst intentions and insecurities and all of your stuff. And I think that is a much better forum, I think, to try and have an actual communion. You know, I think the internet is kind of just making us, we're all kind of tapping away at our keyboards and getting angry and angry and getting more and more and more attacked, you know. And I think we gotta talk. We gotta talk in person. I think we need to try and bring that back. I sound like I'm just kind of going on about the good old days.
No, but you know what? In the good old days, and even like you say, face to face, people are less likely to start, you know, reusing secondhand opinions that they've read on some news article.
Absolutely.
Aren't they? You know, people
Absolutely.
themselves face to face.
Absolutely. And you know, when in Ireland, when the anti-abortion legislation was repealed, you know, when they repealed the 8th, you know, the thing that in the surveys, that when they spoke to people about, you know, what it was that actually changed people's minds, and the overwhelming thing was actually women, you know, going and telling their stories door to door. And I think that is so much more, you know, people, you know, we are supposed to, human beings are supposed to, you know, we're made with empathy. We're supposed to kind of talk to each other. We're supposed to, you know, connect with each other. And I think that's the thing that we've sort of lost somewhere along the way, is the ability to sort of say, oh, you're a person in front of me. You're not just a screen. You're not just some opinions. You're not just some attacks. You're actually a human being, and maybe you're a bit afraid, and maybe you're a bit worried, and, you know, maybe we can have this conversation without it being an exchange of, you know, attacks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of attacks, you're a big advocate for trans rights, and you're a feminist, and as are we. But unfortunately, I think there's a group who determine that actually trans rights aren't important, and the TERF movement has become a very, very worrying thing within our community, and we've had issues with it here in Pride in Surrey. What are your views on that? How can we sort of move away from those thoughts, you know, those biases that seem to be constantly infiltrating our minds at the moment, particularly with you know, certain author expressing some very, very strong opinions frequently. You know, how can we protect the LGBT community and all the work that Prides are doing across the country?
Well, you know, I mean, for me, you know, yeah, particularly in the case of that certain author, I, you know, for me, whenever I've spoken about this, and I've spoken about it a lot, it seems to come down to what has been falsely sort of represented as a conflict of interests between, often it's the argument is that it's supposedly between, you know, butch lesbians or you know, masculine lesbians or masculine non-binary people, and sort of women's rights, and I think that is, for all the reasons that I said before, I just don't recognize that binary. I don't recognize that the dichotomy at all. You know, I think for one thing, we are natural allies. You know, apart from anything else, apart from getting into you know, all of the sort of intricacies of this argument, you know, there is a patriarchy and a white supremacy that exists across the whole world, which we are natural allies, that we should be working together to take it down. You know, queer people of all identities and women are allies in the fight against the patriarchy. So it's maddening to me that, you know, we're sitting here kind of squabbling amongst each other, you know, for the 1%, when 99% of all culture is still basically straight, white, cis, able-bodied men. You know, it's so mad to me that that's what we're doing. But I think, you know, so much of what I hear is in exactly the way that we were talking about before. You know, I've had some really, really vicious abuse from TERFs, and I've had some really, you know, dreadful stuff. Some of the worst stuff that's ever been said to me actually has not been said by homophobes, but by supposed feminists. But then I do meet people who I believe are afraid and have been radicalized. That's, at the end of the day, this is a movement of radicalization. For what it's worth, I think J.K. Rowling has been radicalized. You know, I don't think she's like evil. I think she believes in some things. She believes in some attacks and some fears that I don't recognize as being true. I think that is a radicalization that's taken place. It's a shame that she is such an enormously high profile, and now unfortunately millions of people across the world are listening to her. But I think my response to all of this when people talk to me about, you know, is there space for lesbians? Is there space for butch lesbians? Is there space for, while there's trans people and while there's non-binary people, you know, like, aren't we all, like, you know, fighting for the kind of identities that we're allowed to have? Like, my response to that is just to say, you know, I struggled a lot, as I said before, when I was young, because of not having any butch lesbian role models, right? And for me personally, that is my journey. I'm cisgender and I'm a lesbian and I'm a butch lesbian. And, you know, that doesn't take away from anybody else's journey, you know, and I think that's the thing that we've got to recognize is that, you know, it might be the case that, you know, you look at a teenager and you think, well, hey, when I was your age, I thought this, but that's not you. They're a different person. They've got a different journey. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, like, if we could, like I said earlier on about dialogue, if we could all of us, the TERFs included, if we could just agree to sort of come to this conversation with a respect for each other at the base level, you know, it might be the case that we don't necessarily agree about everything, but I think I have only ever seen abuse coming from one side, and I do mean abuse. I mean dreadful abuse. I'm just gonna. Do you mind if I just take my headphones out because I've stopped being able to hear you? And I think, yeah. Just see if it's gonna make the dog talk because everything else does.
We can't hear you
now.
Can't hear me now.
No.
Okay, well, is that any good?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, cool. We'll just go one ear in, one ear out. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I don't have any answers for how unfortunately completely toxic this environment has become. But I do think, you know, if you are somebody who, especially if you're a lesbian, especially if you're a butch lesbian and you're a feminist and you read some stuff like J.K. Rowling might have written, and you think, you know, hey, like that she's speaking for me, I would really encourage you to just look at these people and look at the power that they have and the fact that they have never used that power to further lesbian rights. Or, you know, J.K. Rowling wrote an obviously incredibly successful 7-book series, and there isn't a single gay character in it. You know, how is it the case that now we're like, well, J.K. Rowling's the absolute defender of gay people? I mean, since when? You know, like when I was growing up, I didn't need anybody to have a go at trans people on my behalf, but I did. It would have changed my life to have a lesbian character in Harry Potter. Do you know what I mean? And she had that power. So why now? You know, all of these people who kind of now are sort of coming out of the woodwork, and now they care so much about gay rights and lesbian rights, and they care so much about lesbian visibility. And I have to say, like, I would encourage you to just consider where that comes from and consider why they never cared about lesbian visibility before, you know. And as far as that argument goes, you know, for my part, you know, in many ways, like, the mission of my career is that I want to be a very visible lesbian. That's what I want to be, because I didn't have anybody like that when I was growing up, and I know it would have been very valuable to me. But, you know, my being a visible lesbian doesn't take away from anybody else's journey. And if there is like a transgender singer who's like got, you know, an incredible platform, that doesn't take away from my opportunities either. You know, like, none of us are in competition with each other. We still see such a narrow section of them represented anywhere, you know. So, like, why are we fighting amongst ourselves for this tiny bit of spotlight that the whole fucking heteronormative patriarchy has given us, when we could be turning our shared efforts that way and saying, well, hang on a minute, like, we should have a bit more of the pie, because there's enough to go around, there's enough airtime to go around, there's enough spotlight to go around, there's enough oxygen to go around, you know. And I think that's, so I really that's what I'd love to see happen. I would love to see feminists and lesbians and gay men and bisexual people and you know, the whole rainbow of queerness. I would love to see us turn around and say, maybe we should stop fighting each other, and maybe we should take a bit more of the chunk that's still over there, completely untouched, you know?
Well, we're all working on it. It's what we're all doing. You know, it's part of our roles.
Yeah, you and me both. Yeah.
But it's interesting you touched on there about abuse you received online, and you're quite vocal on Twitter about, your support for BLM and your support for the trans community. And how do you deal with that disgusting abuse that you do receive on the internet?
Well, I think I'm quite lucky that I have a very, very good, amazing family. My parents were always very, very accepting of me, and I think certainly not everybody my age had the knowledge that I had from a really young age that it was never going to be a problem that I was gay. That was made very clear in my household. So I think I come from quite a strong foundation of, my family, my friends. I think I probably have I don't suffer from a lack of confidence or self-esteem, put it that way. So it doesn't really, I'm lucky that it doesn't really get to me. But I think, I really would say I just recently I went away for a week to the seaside without my phone at all, and it made an enormous difference, to be honest. I'm so aware that I keep circling back to this hating the internet thing like a Luddite, but I just I think that we're so encouraged to be online all the time, and I think particularly this year when so many of us have had our other things kind of taken away, and so much of us have had to be online so much more to do our jobs, to be at school, to be learning, to be connecting with people, and I think it's for me, I know when I'm getting really ground down by Twitter, and I'm on Twitter all the time, and I can really feel it in myself when I'm getting, this, because I think I have quite a positive disposition, and I am quite optimistic about the world, in spite of the way I keep losing elections. But I think I think it's not a bad thing sometimes to just kind of say, well, listen, I am able to walk away from this. And like I said before, I found it, like even with the worst abuse that I've ever got, I think it has been useful to me. And I know this sounds incredibly pious, but it has been useful to me to just kind of take a step back before I reply and go, well, this is a person. This is a human being, and do I want to say anything to them that I wouldn't say if they were stood here in front of me? And I've found that that's kind of a good way, because then I think I find it very important with social media that way I don't end up saying anything that I can't stand by later. I think it's really important to me that I don't say anything that I can't stand behind. Having said that, I'm quite bad for taking the piss out of people on Twitter, and I think sometimes when I get this ridiculous, I mean, a couple of months ago I was somebody expressed dismay that I am a supporter of trans rights, and they said, well, I won't be coming to any more of your gigs. And I said, great, please don't. I genuinely don't want because I have a lot of trans people in my audience, and I have implicitly promised them a safe space, and I think it's just really great that you stay away, because I talk about this stuff a lot at gigs. And then that turned into a massive pile-on, and they were having a great time going on about how they were all going to boycott my gigs, but they were never going to go to my gigs in the first place anyway because I'm shit, and also it's a violation of their human rights that I won't let them come, but also they wouldn't be seen dead at my shit gigs. And I was like, guys, I haven't got any gigs. It's a pandemic. It can't be a fine thing to have you boycott one of my gigs. So I think you gotta have some sense of humor about it as well at the end of the day. Otherwise, I think that way lies madness.
Yeah, absolutely. And if only we took a leaf out of your book, if everybody took a leaf out of your book, and
stepping away from the internet for a bit wouldn't be a bad thing.
But also humanizing what we read on the screen, I think, is really important, isn't it? Because you just never know what's going on in somebody else's life.
Oh yeah, but some of the opinions expressed on the internet, you find hard to believe they come from a human.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Right, listen, I know you're going to give us a rendition of Black Tie a little bit later, but I just wanted to talk to you about that song, because we're mums to a queer child, and for her, who's an activist, and you're her biggest hero.
I remember meeting her,
yeah. But she really, really related to that song, and she just loves it, and it's just clicked with her, and it was the thing that made her fall in love with your music. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of things about it. So I know I've heard you say before that had you known how popular it would be, you would have perhaps written it slightly differently. So were you surprised about the popularity of it? And also, I'm really interested, I'd love you to tell our viewers the story behind the video, because the video is just awesome.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. Yeah, that's one of my favorite days. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, so Black Tie, is this song that sort of completely changed my career actually, and kind of turned everything around for me. And I was no, I mean, the answer is unequivocally no. I never expected it to be that popular. And it's ironic because I actually, of all the things I've ever written, it was the one thing that I thought, well, you know, this is such a specific experience. I don't think very many people are going to relate to this. But basically, I mean, just for your viewers, so the song is basically a letter to my teenage self. And when I was a teenager, I mean, I've always been very butch, you know, and that's something that it took me an awful long time to be comfortable with, and to get to a point now at the age of 33 where I would describe myself as proud to be butch, which is definitely something that when I was 13, 14, I just could never imagine. You know, it was the most mortifying thing in the world to me. And then I kind of, you know, I sort of, you know, grew up, and I you know, was very fortunate to have the career that I've had, and was lucky to be able to sort of tell my stories on stage. And then the more I got confident about butchness, particularly, not just about being gay, but this specific thing about being butch, you know, the more I kind of realized that it wasn't an accident that I felt ashamed of it. And I'd been made to feel ashamed of it basically all my life. Because, you know, of a patriarchal society which at the very best completely ignores butch lesbians, and at the worst completely demonizes and vilifies them. And, you know, these were images that I'd been completely absorbing my entire life. And that's, you know, there's a line in the song that goes, the images that fucked you were a patriarchal structure. And I sort of had this light bulb moment when I turned 30, around about the time of Me Too, actually. It was kind of the effect that Me Too had on me, was that I sort of realized, you know, that all the images of butch lesbians that I'd ever seen my whole life, you know, on TV or in films or whatever, you know, they were kind of written by these men like Harvey Weinstein, who kind of wrote, you know, this caricature of the predatory butch lesbian preying on women. And, you know, I don't know any lesbians who have ever behaved that way. And then I kind of had this blood curdling sort of rage when Me Too happened, because I sort of realized that these scripts that I'd been afraid to embody my whole life were not real. You know, this stereotype was not a real thing, and I didn't need to worry about women thinking I was a predator or women being afraid of me the way that I'd always subconsciously sort of been absorbing all these years. So I sat down and I wrote a song that was basically like, if I could talk to my 15-year-old self, what would I say? And a major part of it was basically, you won't possibly believe me when I say this, but one day you won't just be happy that you're butch. You'll be so proud of it, and you'll get up on stage and you'll be as butch as you possibly can be. You know, it won't be something that you're ashamed of, and it won't be something that you're hiding, but it'll actually be something that you feel so empowered by. And the irony, of course, of all of that is that then the song went on to be the most successful thing I've ever done, because a lot of people were sort of sharing that experience, you know. And I got an enormous amount of emails and messages from people like your child, I think, who were connecting to something that was making them feel represented, you know. And it's that thing again that I was saying about just never seeing anybody who was telling a similar story to mine or looked anything like me anywhere, you know, on stage or screen. I mean, for me, I went to see Hannah Gadsby in 2018, and she did an incredible show about being a butch lesbian. And it was just, I mean, I just sobbed all the way through it. You know, I started crying about 10 minutes in, and I sobbed all the way through the show. And then I came home and I basically wrote Black Tie a few days later, because just the power of seeing somebody who kind of understands this experience and talking about it on stage without shame and, you know, with empowerment was an amazing thing to me. So yeah, so I wrote the song, and then when I was 16, I went to my prom, my high school prom, and I wore a dress, and it was the absolute worst night of my life. And, you know, this is gosh, you know, 17 years ago. And the idea of not wearing a dress just kind of wasn't an option to me. You know, at that time that was just what I had to do. And I had such a horrible time, and you know, I don't want to be really dramatic, but I think it was a bit of a scar, you know. It was a bit of a mental scar, that experience. And so when it came time to make the video for Black Tie, because it talks about being, you know, wearing a suit and kind of being dressed in formal wear. I had this idea that I was like, you know what would be really great would be if we could do a prom, some way sort of reclaim. Can you hear me, you guys?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my computer's telling me lies. So yeah, I wanted to do a prom to sort of try and reclaim that experience. And so we hired a hall, and we invited basically like prom age like listeners or fans, I guess, if you will, to come along and sort of encourage them to just wear whatever they felt most comfortable in. And it was such an amazing day. It was like there was so many times across the day when like I was welling up and my band were welling up, and you know the camera guys were welling up, because you know all of these young people, these amazing young people turned up, and there was sort of, you know, girls in suits, and you know, like boys in dresses, and then you know, and also every kind of possible expression of gender, in, you know, cis, trans, non-binary, in any kind of expression of clothes, and they all seemed so happy. And then there's kind of a scene in the video where, so I kind of face my demons and I put on a dress to film this video. And there's a scene where I'm kind of in this suit at my age now, and I'm talking to my teenage self in that dress and saying, you know, one day, like, you don't believe this, but everything's going to be all right. You're going to be so happy in the future, and you'll realize that there's nothing wrong with the way you are. And also it'll become this great source of strength for you. It'll become this great source of empowerment, and you'll take it on stage, and it'll actually, ironically, you know, fuel your career so far, because there are so many people who share that experience. And I never thought that was going to be the case at all. You know, I mean, I wrote it and I finished writing it, and I was like, I mean, I love this song. This has been really useful to me. This is kind of therapy for me. This is an incredibly cathartic experience. But I didn't think it was really going to chime much with anybody. And that, you know, I couldn't have been more wrong. So I think, yeah, I thank you for what you said about your child relating to it, because, you know, that's really what I wanted to achieve. And I think if there's like a single teenager out there who saw that video and went, oh, hey, maybe it's all right actually that I look like this, or that I feel like this, or that I identify this way, and maybe there's nothing wrong with me, then, you know, that's the highest praise I could have. That's the best thing I could ever achieve with that song.
Had a big impact in this house.
It really and I think that the joy in that video, it's palpable. You know, you can feel it when you watch it. You can feel the joy of all those people who are enjoying that amazing gig, and it was just fantastic. It reminds me of Pride in Surrey. We run a queer prom every year. We haven't had one this year, but we did the year before, and it was fantastic for loads of young people, and just sort of resonates, I think.
It reminded me of being a kid back in, what would have been 1996, when I was the shy little, you know, only dyke in the village, and I was the first girl to wear a shirt and tie to my prom.
Wow.
I had this lovely art teacher that took me to one side. She said, I think you're very brave, dear. Well done for being you. And it was just, it was incredible. So that video just took me back to being, you know, that uncomfortable little teenager.
That's amazing. And, you know, and I think, you know, wherever we are and whoever we are, I think everybody has a memory like that in them somewhere. You know what I mean? Everybody, and you know, like, it's amazing that so many queer people relate to that song. But I've had like straight, cis, you know, middle-aged men come up to me and say, oh, that black tie really got me. And I'm like, wow. You know, like, really? I mean, I'm glad, because I think at the end of the day, you know, everybody's got like a little bit of a lonely teenager inside them somewhere, you know. And I think for me, like, I was so happy to be able to do that, you know, and to have that experience and have those young people have that experience on the day. But it was really like, for myself, it was like exercising, you know, that memory and really reclaiming that idea, you know. And now I don't look back on my prom from when I was 16 and cringe the way I used to. Because you feel like, well, hey, you know, look what I did, look where I came from, you know, look where I got to from that experience, and hopefully, you know. And what's lovely is, like, when it comes time, obviously again not this year, but when it comes like summertime, when it gets to sort of May and June, I get a lot of like young people tweeting me like pictures like of themselves in their, you know, prom get up and saying like, you know, this is because I listen to Black Guy, and it's so amazing, honestly. It makes me cry every time. Yeah.
Well, imagine that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Anyway, moving on from the torture of being a teenager to the torture of this year being locked down, and what that's done to artists and venues and, you know, the industry as a whole. I mean, how's it affected you? How have you got through that, and do you think we can actually recover in terms of small venues and independent artists?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very, very, very lucky, to be honest with you, this year. I mean, I'm in a very unique position because last year, just because of the way things fell, it wasn't deliberate or anything, but I actually ended up doing like 2 years worth of gigs in 2019. So because I ended up doing like 150 shows across the year, which was arguably too many, and I was very exhausted by the end. But that meant that I was in a kind of, I was like in an okay position. If this had happened to me at any other point in my career, it would have been, you know, I would have been in real trouble financially. And, you know, as always, I have an incredible audience who are so supportive, and, you know, things like selling merch. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with every first Friday of the month, Bandcamp, which is the website that I sell my music and my merch through. Since the start of the pandemic, they have been waiving their cut on the first Friday of the month, which is an amazing service to us. Yeah, and I've been getting, you know, a good boost every month from people who are kind of buying stuff and supporting me that way. I mean, you know, I think it's tragic. Like, it's what's happening to a lot of small venues. There's no way to sugarcoat it, really. And I think that when we come out of it, I hope we all make it out to the other side. In terms of music, I think it might well be time for us to look at the fact that, you know, this is not really sustainable. We don't really have a sustainable model for selling music anymore. You know, since streaming sites came along, and we kind of like stopped people expecting to pay for music. You know, now artists just completely live off the live scene. And that is great when everything's okay, but, you know, it does make you think. I mean, I thought a lot this year that, like, you know, when this happened, it happened to everybody, and there was sort of government support, and I could claim self-employment grants and stuff. But it could happen in, you know, in a couple of years, I might break my leg, and then I might not be able to tour. And, you know, what protections do we have in terms of employment rights and stuff? I think it's something for us to think about. But, you know, I don't want to come across as I think this is a very privileged thing for me to say, and I sit in a very privileged position. Because, you know, I have had a very, very, very charmed career where I've had a lot of amazing opportunities. But I really would encourage people, I think, to not be too downhearted about the future of live music, because, you know, at the end of the day, like, it will always be there in some form. And it might be that, you know, and I don't want to in any way belittle the plight of small venues who I know are struggling so much across the country, and I'm trying my best to support them in whatever ways that I can. But I think it is really important to know that, you know, there will still be, the only thing you ever need is the audience. And as long as there are people who want to listen to music, and there are people who want to play music, live music will be okay, you know. And it's going to need community support, and we're going to need to pull together. And we definitely need, you know, as soon as we're able to do gigs, we all need to get out there, and we need to spend money, and we need to make sure that gigs are happening. But, you know, I think I don't want young musicians particularly to feel like they're coming up at this time that there's nothing. Because I think, you know, if my career and my strange way that I've had a career has taught me anything, it's that, you know, you can just make stuff happen. You know, you don't need to wait to be booked for a gig. Like, there's always going to be church halls, there's always going to be scout huts, you know, there's always going to be parks, you know, and if you can get a few mates together and you can, you know, sing some songs, then that's a gig, you know. And I think that sounds really, really naive, but I just think that you know, I heard about this fucking Van Morrison and Eric Clapton have done this song, which is like an anti-lockdown song. I don't know if you heard about this. Yeah, it's like, it's not good. It's quite conspiracy theory stuff, and it's like a, you know, lest there be any doubt from anybody, I as hard as it's been, I fully support lockdown, and I fully support community response to the virus, which is just that we have to
you know, stay in our houses for a while until it's gone. But you know, Van Morrison said that live music was going to disappear as a result of this, and I think that's like a really that's one side of looking at it, which I think is quite capitalist based, to be honest. You know, live music is never going to disappear, and it might be the case that some of the massive arenas go under, and I think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, and I don't, in terms of small venues and independent venues, like, I'm not in any way taking that lightly, but I do think it is really important that we tell the kids that are coming up in bands, like, you know, you can do it though, like, you're still going to be able to do it. And I think it's really important that we might just, going forward, we might just have to have a bit more of a DIY attitude, you know, and it might be time again to like get out and make sure you go to your mates' gigs, and make sure you're flyering your mates' gigs, you know, like it, but showing up is always going to be like worth more, I think, than I just kind of worry about this narrative that you know, it's all about money, and that money, you know, if the money's not there, it's all going to go to shit. And I think it's, and again, like I'm not trying to in any way belittle anybody's struggle in terms of independent venues, which I know are the hardest working businesses, you know, in the industry. But I do think where there's a will, and where there's songs, and where there's people who want to hear them, it's really important that we know that, you know, like, hey, my, rock and roll will never die. You know what I mean? I think it's really important to kind of make sure that that's like a part of the narrative as well. Yeah.
No, it's good that you feel positive about it.
Yeah, I do, you know, and I think I mean, and as I say, like, I sit here with an amazingly supportive audience who, you know, have been taking care of me all year, and I'm so grateful for that. I really am. And I know that not everybody is in that position, and I don't want to sound like I'm just sitting here going, hey, I think it's all going to be okay. But I think if we work together, I think that's my, you know, that's my, feels like my answer to every question you ask is like, if we work together, if we talk to each other, and if we have empathy for each other, then I think there's a way through, you know?
Yeah. Community. And I think just, you know, I suppose the message is, when lockdown does end, when we are, you know, when we have got the option to go to gigs, that we just need to get behind all those artists and support as much as we can, you know, when we can. And you know what, music's always been around, and music brings joy to the soul, so it will always be there. You're right, in whatever form. We just need to keep supporting.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, just again to just pick up on that thing I said about streaming, you know, I think it's worth people considering that, you know, if they can't go to gigs, you know, consider buying music, you know, not from me, but from your, you know, your artists out there who are struggling, you know, consider buying music. Like, even if you can hear it on Spotify, even if you've got a Spotify subscription, if you can spare it, go and buy the album, you know, because you listening to it on Spotify isn't helping that artist make anything, and that's not helping them, you know, make any more music at the end of the day. And I think that's something that going forwards, like coming out of this, you know, this has been an absolute, you know, sea change for the whole live arts industry. And I think it would be a shame if we didn't learn some of the lessons out of it, if we came out of it just kind of trying to do things the way we did them before, when I think this has really proved that model is quite broken, I think, you know. And I think, you know, artists have got to be paid for their music, and at the moment the vast majority of people are streaming, and that's not, you know, that's not paying anybody really, apart from shareholders in Spotify.
Yeah, well, that's it. We're still old school, aren't we? Always buy a copy for the car. So.
Yeah.
Right, I'm going to ask you a question that we asked Peter Tatchell, so no pressure.
Oh wow.
Pride in Surrey is a small pride. We're in our infancy, but we're a 365-day-a-year pride, and we work every single day really hard for the community, and we don't just turn up for our party in the park once a year. You know, it's good work, I think, that we do. But given the progress in terms of equality, how important do you think that grassroots pride movements are? Are we still relevant?
I think that it's never been more relevant. I think community-led pride has never, ever been more relevant. And I think particularly, you know, there's been a lot of conversations in the last few years about corporate prides, and about, you know, the corporate influence at pride. And I think in response to you know, to what we were saying earlier on about this kind of backlash of transphobia that we now see is so seamlessly turning into homophobia, like we always knew it would. I think at the end of the day, like, Pride is still a protest, and it will always be a protest. You know, I mean, maybe there will be some sort of utopia in the far off distance where, you know, being queer is absolutely no different to being cis or being straight. But I don't think we're going to get there in my lifetime. And I think until there is no person anywhere in the world that feels like their life has been made harder in any way for being queer, then Pride events are always, to my mind, going to be of absolute paramount importance. And I think it is essential, to my mind, it's essential that they're community led. It's essential that there is a political element to them, because at the end of the day, you know, the kind of free speech brigade who would have you believe that, you know, everything's, you know, there's no such thing as homophobia, there's no such thing as transphobia, you know, the need for Pride events, I think, to my mind, like, I think it's still the case. I remember my first Pride. I remember going to my first Pride when I was like 14, and I was so nervous and like, and you know, and I was so kind of terrified that people from school were going to see me there. And I think you know, like 20 years later, Pride still provides that, I think, for people. Pride still provides what is a safe space in a world that feels increasingly hostile, I think, to queer people. And I think, you know, these sort of conversations about, obviously, the London Pride was interrupted by, you know, turf protests a couple of years ago, and that has been, I think, a horrible, horrible wound, I think, on the whole community. And I think the impact that had on the queer community across Britain, you know, can't be overstated. And the necessity that Pride always remains a voice of equality and a voice of justice, you know, for everybody in the queer community, for everybody in the world, of course, but like for everybody in the queer community. I think it's more important to me now than ever that, you know, Pride celebrations and Pride events, you know, nail their colours to the mast as being for everybody. So it's never been more relevant to me. It's never been more important than it is now. Yeah.
That's good to hear. We're working hard. Yeah, we work hard locally, and as Lisa said, we do, you know, we work all year round. We're not just a party. We provide support and services all year round. So yeah, be nice to see a Pride pop up in every borough, in every town, and see people working together for it.
Yeah.
It feels to me like it's a good time for you to maybe give us a blast of black tie if you're willing.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, the only audiences that I have these days are staring down the camera of the laptop. But, yeah, I've got my little dog here who might well start barking midway through, but you can just consider it backing vocals. That's fine. But this is like. Jungle out there. The year 2018, I didn't think we'd still be sorting babies into blue and pink, and all our progress. Yeah, I wonder what it means when the only girls close the word for me turn out to be boyfriend jeans. Well, that's fine, 'cause I decline. The narrow set of rules that just don't work. And these red lines, they're not mine. If you need me, you can find me ironing my shirt, 'cause I'm in black tie tonight. Get a postcard to my year 11 self, in a year 11 hell, saying everything's gonna be alright. No, you won't grow out of it. You will find the clothes that fit, and the images that fucked you. We're a patriarchal structure, and you never will surrender to a narrow view of gender. And I swear there'll come a day when you won't worry
worry what they say on the labels and on the doors. You will figure out what's yours. And it's a bloody nightmare, trying to fight the spread of bigotry and fear. That's uniting peers, Morgan in Jamaica in, and all our progress. Yeah, I wonder who it's for. When I dare to utter that trans lives matter here, and all I got was a turf war. Well, that's fine, 'cause I decline your narrow set of rules. They just don't work. And these red lines, they're not mine. If you need me, you can find me ironed in my shirt, 'cause I'm in black tie tonight. Get a postcard to mine. Year 11 self, in her year 11 hell, saying everything's gonna be alright. No, you won't grow out of it, you will find the clothes that fit, and the images that fucked you. We're a patriarchal structure. You never will surrender to a narrow view of gender, and I swear there'll come a day when you won't worry what they say on the labels and on the doors. You will figure out what's yours. You will figure out what's yours, and that it's got nothing to do with fitting neatly in a box that was constructed to make it seem like people come in just two teams, and anything that's in between ain't good enough. And you will love, and you'll be loved, and you're in black tie tonight. Get a postcard to mine. Year 11 self, in her year 11 hell, darling, everything's gonna be alright. No, you won't grow out of it, you will find the clothes that fit, and the images that fucked you. We're a patriarchal structure, and you never will surrender to that narrow view of gender. And there's folks you've yet to meet, but you're exactly up their street, and they've been waiting just as long to hear someone sing this song. And I swear there'll come a day when it won't matter what they say on the labels and on the doors. You will figure out what's yours. And girl, you're gonna be so happy. Girl, you're gonna be just fine. Girl, you're gonna be so happy. Down the line, down the line.
That was absolutely incredible. Thank you so much. That's our absolute favourite, and you just nailed it. Thank you.
It's nice to get to play again, to be honest.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Now, do you know what? We, as well as this being streamed across our channels, our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, our Twitter page, we also broadcast this on Trans Radio UK and on Radio Woking. So at the end of that, we would like to pick a song to play on your behalf. And what song would you choose for us to play you?
Oh, wow. A song to play me. I think I'd go with... just because it always makes me dance, I'd go with Walking on Broken Glass by Annie Lennox. Never fails to put me in a good mood. But, you know, can't win it all.
Oh, that's incredible. Grace, thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been an absolute honour and a pleasure. Really enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much. And thanks for all that you're doing. I think it's absolutely amazing. And yeah, thanks to everybody for watching as well.
Thank you.
Grace.
Cheers, Grace. Thank you.
All right.